to speak for the Monterey Peace and Justice Center, and you know, the Monterey Peace and Justice Center really is a pioneer in the sense that when I give a talk, they're usually the first ones to sponsor me, even before the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. So this is in fact the first time that I'm giving this talk. So you know, it's a works in progress, and you know, unlike other talks that I've given, this is something that, you know, we're all in it. We're all in it in something that is absolutely unprecedented, and this is a situation that is moving so fast that, you know, just a month ago I would never have believed that we would be in it in a lockdown. So in that sense, this talk is a little bit different from the ones that I usually give, because usually I'm sort of the expert for having really investigated a particular situation or gone to a particular country that may be hard to get to. In this case, we're all living it, and so I really think of this as more of a initially a briefing, and then hopefully a discussion. I really want to spend a little more time in a discussion, because each and every one of you are living through this, and you have experiences, you have ideas, you have thoughts on what it means for all of us and for the future of humanity, for the future of the planet. Okay, so with that, I'll get started. And what I want to do today is I want to basically cover 4 areas. So the first one is sort of examining some of maybe the less obvious or less well-known aspects of this global calamity, and you know, some of the unexpected things that have come about as a result of it. This is by no means intended to be comprehensive. It's just, you know, these are my personal observations, and I'm sure each and every one of you will have a lot to add from your own observations and experiences. The second thing is to put COVID-19 as a disease that is causing this pandemic in a little bit of perspective. And thirdly, to examine some of the unexpected responses, some of the unexpected consequences, some of the unexpected things that have been happening in the course of the pandemic. And then what that means, fourthly, in terms of the opportunities that it provides, because, you know, it may seem paradoxical that here, okay, we're in this catastrophic situation that is literally shutting down the world economy, and yet, you know, is there some not only light at the end of the tunnel, but is there an opportunity to learn from this and come out from it with something gained? Yes, we've lost a lot. We've lost a lot in terms of the economy. We've lost a lot in terms of life, but maybe in the end we will also gain something from it. So that's sort of an outline of today's talk. And so let's start with the first, which is the unprecedented global calamity and some of the unexpected things that have happened. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so let me see. So everybody should be seeing now I put my PowerPoint up on your screen, so you should be able to see it. So these are the four sub areas that I'm going to talk about. So in terms of the first thing that I think has really taken our breath away is how this tiny little virus has done something to, in a way, to the planet, because it is global. That in a span of 3 months from the time of the first known case of COVID-19 that was identified in Wuhan, China, on the 10th of December 2019, and this map was, I captured this map on the 16th of March this year, so about 3 months after the first case, and you see how all the countries that are colored in either black or red are countries that, as of March 16th, had known cases of COVID-19. Now that doesn't mean the other countries that are colored in gray do not have any cases, but they had no testing. They had no testing to enable them to confirm that that they had cases of COVID-19. So in the span of 3 months, this virus has spread to virtually every country and territory on the planet, and wherever it has touched, it has had an impact in terms of just public fear, and as a result, moves to by each one of these countries and territories to limit the spread of the virus by shutting down or taking precautions within their economies. And locally, you know, we've witnessed, I'm sure every one of you has seen this. You've gone to the supermarkets and any store that sells essential items is still open, and you'll find that certain shelves are absolutely empty. And so this is a supermarket, and this particular section is the section that sells pasta. And obviously the reason that pasta gets sold out is because it's easy to prepare. So you've got all these people who might be eating out, might be preferring to eat out. Now they don't have a choice, they have to eat at home, and they want something that's relatively easy to prepare. So the pasta gets sold out, but other things that you have to prepare from scratch, like if you go to the produce section, it's usually still, it looks almost like normal. So this is a phenomenon. So I scratched my head for a bit and I said, okay, let me analyze this. So if I analyze it, now what's happening here is not necessarily that there's a panic. I mean, there is a panic, but the shortage of certain foods, the fact that some foods are out of stock, is not necessarily or totally due to a panic. Because here's the thing, is that I'm making certain assumptions here about our eating patterns, based on just my experience and what I know of people I know, that, you know, we don't necessarily eat 21 meals a week. Some, including myself, we skip a few meals when we're in a hurry. And so I estimate, I'm just putting out a number for the purposes of discussion, that the average person eats about 18 proper meals a week. And a dining survey by Zagat has found out in the there's a survey released in 2018 that Americans eat out about 5.9 times per week. That means 5.9 meals out of the total that people eat are eaten out. And suddenly we no longer can eat out. We can go and get food to take out, but that number of meals that are takeout is it's a tiny fraction of the total meals that were eaten out or taken out before the pandemic. And in our area, I mean, I'm in Silicon Valley, and in Silicon Valley, many of the companies, we have a huge number, as all of you know, of tech workers. And these tech workers are given free food in their workplaces, and which means that on average we eat out more than 5.9 times a week. So if you now say that, okay, that what this means is that in the sheltering in place, suddenly we're eating all these additional meals, 6 meals a week additional in the home. So we have to buy that much more food just to feed ourselves. And so that is why the supermarkets are running out of many kinds of food items, and others are just, you know, low in stock. It's not necessarily because of a panic, because a lot of foods, of course, are perishable, but just because people are eating a lot more at home. Now, another thing that, you know, we have been fighting a long struggle against climate change, and the developing economies and our own economy that, you know, is the world's largest producer of greenhouse gases. The developing economies, India, China, the African countries are coming along, and as they develop, they consume more energy, and that contributes to greenhouse gases. And suddenly the virus comes along, and for the first time, there is a dramatic reduction in atmospheric emissions, such as, you know, pollutants, such as nitrogen dioxide, and carbon dioxide. These kinds of greenhouse gases have actually dropped, and the global consumption of crude oil, and really this is just the beginning, because these are data from March, and the consumption of crude oil has dropped by 25%. So so there's now an absolute glut of crude oil, and the price of this crude has dropped. It's come up from the low point, but at one point the West Texas Intermediate price actually slid below $20 a barrel, and $20 a barrel, of course, is well below the operating cost to produce those barrels, at least in the United States. And I'll mention this. There are a few things that come up along the way, and this is that price is partly a result of a dispute between Saudi Arabia and Russia, which are which have long been the two largest crude oil exporters in the world. Now the United States is joining them, and the United States actually has become has turned from being the world's largest importer of crude oil to a substantial crude oil exporter. And in the news, there was this talk about how Saudi Arabia and Russia, and when I say Saudi Arabia, I really mean Saudi Arabia as the leader of OPEC, being the largest exporter and the largest the largest exporter in OPEC. It has a dominant position, and it was in negotiations with Russia to cut production in order to boost the price. When those negotiations fell apart, Saudi Arabia made an unprecedented decision, which was, instead of cutting production unilaterally, it decided to ramp up production. It said, we're going to pump as much as we can. And the business news reported that this was its retaliation against Russia. And I think that it was actually something that is an unspoken dispute between Saudi Arabia and the United States. But the Saudis couldn't actually say that because the Saudis have, at least in public, have a military alliance with the United States. Not only do they have a military alliance with the United States, but they have they peg their dollar, their Saudi riyal, to the U.S. dollar, which is not only good for the Saudis, but it's also good for, it helps to stabilize the dollar. And so they couldn't say that blame, they couldn't fire criticism at the U.S., and yet the United States is actually the real change in the oil market over the last few years, because what is causing the current glut in oil and the low prices is not the Saudis increasing production, it's not the Russians increasing production. And some OPEC members like Venezuela and Iran have, their production has plummeted. The big changer, the big game changer in the oil industry is the United States because of hydraulic fracking. And the United States is now pumping something like 13 million barrels per day. It is the world's largest oil producer and an exporter. And so the price war, the Saudi-Russian price war, as it has been characterized, is really aimed at the United States because the U.S. has the highest cost of production of the three. The Saudis can survive because their production costs are very low. The Russians can survive because their production costs are a bit higher, but nothing compared to the cost of producing a barrel of oil from a fracking, from the shale oil fields in the Permian Basin or the Bakken shale area. So so anyway, that's my side commentary on the oil price, and it comes at a time of the pandemic when demand for crude oil has plummeted by 25%. The Saudis knew that this fall in consumption was going to happen because this happened after the pandemic had started, and that's why it convinces me that this was deliberate and what the real reasons were, at least in the minds of the Saudis. Okay, enough for that. Another consequence of the pandemic is the impact on migrant workers, and this is huge. This is huge because you know, the world over the last 40 years has become increasingly dependent on migrant workers. And what this means is we're not talking about immigrants. We're talking about workers who go to other countries to work temporarily. At least that's the legal basis for their migration, is that they're there as temporary workers with the intention that they will return to their own countries when their labor contracts are ended. And this is true of laborers coming to the United States, a huge flow of workers going to Europe, a huge flow of workers going to the Middle East, and then the internal migrations in China and India that are on scales that we can hardly imagine, because what we're talking about in China is millions, and I'm talking about more than 100 million workers who come from the internal provinces like Sichuan, Chongqing, migrating to the early industrialization centers of China on its east coast, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. Shenzhen is an industrial city that came up along the border of Hong Kong about 40 years ago. It was a village at the time, and now has something like 13 million population. That's twice the size of Hong Kong almost, and has the world's largest factories. And so anyway, these workers are migrant workers. They don't have permanent residence in the places where they work. And so when the factory shut down, they lost their income, and they couldn't afford to pay the rent, and they sought to go back to their home villages where they could at least live without paying rent. And what happened in China? The same thing happened just on the 24th of March, when the Indian government announced a nationwide lockdown. So this is not like what's happening in the United States, where each state determines, whether or not to go on a lockdown or a shelter-in-place order. But this was decided in New Delhi by the Prime Minister to lock down the entire country in one fell swoop, ejecting millions of migrant workers from their jobs. And under the conditions of the lockdown, all the trains were canceled. So all the systems of public transit were shut down overnight. And the only way for these workers to get home to their home villages they had to find a private ride. Some private buses were still running. Some walked. They walked from cities to their home villages, which might be 100 miles away. So this was the crisis, and of course, the crowding in those buses was exactly what we didn't want for physical distancing in time of a pandemic. So we expect that, in the coming weeks, we're going to see some catastrophic explosions of new cases of COVID-19 in India and other countries that have high densities of population. Anyway, so these are some of the consequences of what's happening in Europe. What happens is that a lot of the farm work that is done by the developed countries of Northern Europe, particularly the United Kingdom, France and Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, a lot of the labor, in fact, most of the labor that is done on farms in these countries comes either from Eastern Europe or from Northern Africa or Turkey. And the pandemic means that as we approach the summer harvest time, the restrictions on travel prevent these migrant workers, from getting to England, France, and Germany, and the Benelux, and so farmers are stuck without labor. So there are all these sort of unimaginable consequences of the pandemic that are happening everywhere in the world. Of course, in the U.S., I'm not going to. I'm sure most of you are aware of the plight of undocumented workers in the U.S., and this includes a very good proportion of farm workers. In some cases, like in the Imperial Valley, it's like 80 or 90% of farm workers are undocumented. And fortunately, farm work is essential work. We all need food. So farm workers are not going to be thrown out of work. But the other undocumented workers who do lose their jobs are going to be in a tight situation, because they're not going to receive any stimulus checks. Okay, so enough said for some of the unintended consequences. I just realized that this talk is going to run more than a half hour, but if it's of interest, we'll just continue. So I probably won't spend too much time on this because I'm sure you have all looked at this or been exposed to it about the background to COVID-19, which is the name of the disease, coronavirus 2019, which is the year in which it was discovered. The virus itself belongs to a family of SARS viruses, SARS being the severe acute respiratory syndrome, it belongs to a family of coronaviruses, which is one of 150 known families of viruses. In terms of size, the COVID-19 virus is of an intermediate size. It's much larger than a bacteriophage, which is a virus that infects bacteria, and it's smaller than some other viruses, and a lot smaller than a bacterium. It's an RNA virus, and it's approximately 125 nanometers in diameter, and that is about 1,000th the diameter of a human hair. Coronaviruses are characterized by a lipid bilayer membrane with transmembrane proteins that stick out, which give it this sort of structure with these spikes. It looks like spikes. But the important thing I want to point out here is that because it has a lipid bilayer, and this lipid bilayer is one that is broken up by any kind of a surfactant. So that means a surfactant is soap. So this is why simply washing your hands vigorously with soap and water kills the virus. It destroys the virus. It just means that the hand washing cannot be casual. It has to be more thorough. Something that is a little bit closer, you don't have to, but a little closer to a surgical scrub, where you scrub every part of your fingers, including the fingernails and fingertips, more thoroughly. We tend to sometimes forget the fingertips. But that's an important thing to know, that soap is effective, not just in washing it away, but in destroying the virus. And this is just a schematic diagram of the virus, showing the lipid membrane with the proteins embedded in it, and inside, of course, is the RNA, the genetic material of the virus, and that's what one of them looks like. And of course, you're going to see different pictures of the coronavirus, and that's because there are different types of coronaviruses. And but this is generally the general picture of what the COVID-19 virus would look like. It's not as deadly as the SARS-1 or the Middle East respiratory syndrome. I spend a lot of time, looking at these statistics. I'm sure you do too. Just seeing, where we are, and fortunately now we're finally in a phase when we're beginning to see the numbers of new cases and the numbers of new deaths. They're starting to come down, which means that the countries that have been the leading sources of cases have been able to establish some degree of control over the natural spread of the virus. Now, in terms of the death rate, looking at the death rate from COVID-19 is not very easy when you look at it on a table. So it's okay, well, let's put it on a graph. And I was surprised that if you put the numbers on the graph, you get widely differing numbers of the death rate. So what this is the number of deaths per the number of cases. And of course, the story is not finished yet because there are a lot of cases that are still active, and we don't know the outcomes of whether the people will survive or whether they will succumb. So one indication is to add together. What I did in this graph is that the death rate is actually projected. It's a projected death rate based on the number of deaths plus the number of individuals who are currently, as of the date of the data collection, which is today, the number of individuals who are in critical condition or serious condition. So many of those people who are in serious condition will die. There are many people who are not yet in serious condition who will go into serious condition, and they will die. So the statistics should work out. The reason for the variation, however, is because in some cases, well, actually in many cases, there's just simply underreporting of one type or another. So the most obvious one is Russia. So in the case of Russia, there has not been, of course, anywhere near to adequate testing, and so there's a huge, for reasons that you know I'm not prepared to understand, underreporting of deaths. So deaths happen, and maybe the laws in the country do not require a determination of death. In the United States, in Western Europe, the laws are quite demanding in terms of knowing the cause of death. And in the case of Brazil, it's the opposite. It's that the cause of death is determined, but the active cases are grossly underreported because the healthcare system is inadequate. Yeah, it's a single-payer healthcare system in Brazil, but like many developing countries, it's under-resourced. And on top of that, you have in Brazil a president, Jair Bolsonaro, who is in denial about the threat of COVID-19. And so Brazil is in a state of denial about the real number of cases that it has. And so the truth only comes out when people die. And so these are sort of the outliers and why we have such outliers in the data. What else can I say? I can say that countries that have been under sanctions, like Iran, have managed the crisis remarkably well. Countries like Korea, Japan, Taiwan, which is not here, and Vietnam, have been extremely proactive through testing, through preparation, to contain the outbreaks in those countries and really bring them almost to a halt. It's interesting that the countries that have fared the worst are the most developed countries. In some ways, I think it has to do with this arrogance, the arrogance of power, that we're so powerful, we're number one, and it's not a threat here, you know. And so there is this complacency in Western Europe and the United States. Well, no longer, but it's an interesting outcome. In comparison to influenza, which I throw this up here because I just want to show you that the pattern, the age distribution of mortality from COVID-19, which, as you know, affects older people more than young people. This is also true of influenza in a very dramatic way. So the death rate from influenza is much, much higher among people age 65 and older. So China, I like this graph because it really dramatizes a point, which is that when a country acts early to contain an outbreak by restricting travel, by enforcing a lockdown, and while enforcing that lockdown, it also provides support for people to receive food and other essential items in their homes. And this is what China did in Hubei province in general, and then in Wuhan, in the Wuhan metropolitan area in particular. And that has meant that the number of cases that spread, even within China, to other provinces in China was extremely limited. And you contrast that with the United States, where it has spread to every state. And these circles, the size of these circles, are not the number of cases, but rather the infection rate, the incidence of COVID-19 per unit population. And so in terms of the incidence of COVID-19, it's pretty widespread. There's not that dramatic a difference between New York and the other states. Local response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been very inconsistent, and I think this is what happens when it's left up to localities, when it's left up to individual institutions. And in the Bay Area, I'll just give you a few examples. So in the Bay Area, the first major action was well, I wouldn't say that there were not other actions but this was dramatic because it was the full closure of Stanford University to in-person classes and in-person seminars. So this took place on the 9th of March. Okay, and at that time there were no comprehensive closures in any other sector of the Bay Area. So Stanford was a pioneer. On March 10th, San Jose State University, UC Berkeley, and Santa Clara University closed their classrooms to in-person classes and went online. And then other things, including the San Jose Peace and Justice Center 2 days later, we closed to in-person meetings. And then on the 13th of March, Bay Area restaurants began closing for dine-in eating while remaining open for takeout and delivery. But the paradox was that as of the 13th of March, so this is 4 days after Stanford closes, there were petitions from parents in Palo Alto, Cupertino, and other cities requesting the school districts to close down. And as of the 13th, 4 days after Stanford, the superintendent of public instruction in Palo Alto said there's no reason for us to close schools. And this struck me. It struck me as such a huge contradiction that that children, school-age children, it's as if they were less important. They were less in need of health protection than college students and adults. But that's what it amounted to, and probably only on the very flimsy pretext that children won't die. The probability that that children will die of COVID-19 is extremely low, extremely rare. But that's, in retrospect, that's a nonsense excuse, because children can be carriers. They can still catch the disease. Their sanitary habits are notoriously inconsistent. So they can be a nucleus for spread of the disease. And then on the 16th of March, Santa Clara County announces the closure of all schools 3 days later. So these were just some of the inconsistencies in our local response. And there's more that I'll get to. I wanted to just show you a few pictures because I found these to be really remarkable. You know, we haven't experienced this here in the Bay Area because we have acted relatively early, and we haven't had the horrible situation that Spain, Italy, and New York State have been going through. But these are some of the emergency responses, the temporary hospitals that have been set up in Seattle, at the Javits Convention Center in New York City, in Eastern Europe, in Serbia, in Madrid. There are actually a lot of photos of this IFEMA Convention Center in Madrid, where this sort of temporary hospital with physical distancing has been set up. And then I wanted to show this one because here's an example of where we have a reversal of aid flows. Traditionally, aid flows from the wealthy Western countries of Western Europe, United States, Canada, to the developing countries. And here is a temporary hospital in Crema, Italy, which is staffed by 52 Cuban doctors and nurses. Okay, so countries like Cuba, countries like China, Russia, Taiwan are sending medical aid missions to Europe in a remarkable reversal of foreign aid. So there are a lot of, as I said, this crisis has upended all of our assumptions about how things work. Now, how do we pull out of the pandemic? Well, we've all heard the talk about the physical distancing, the sheltering in place as a means of reducing the spread. And what that does, we've heard the terminology, flatten the curve. And but flattening the curve is, the purpose of flattening the curve is to prevent there from being so many concurrent infections at the same time that medical facilities will be absolutely overwhelmed. Okay. The bigger question is, and we've done that, the bigger question is now, how do we get out of this without the pandemic following its natural trajectory, which means that the pandemic will end on its own, whether we act or not, when basically everybody has been infected. And 95% of the people will recover, and the people who have recovered will be immune, and so the pandemic will end that way. But we're a long way from that. Okay, the number of infections in the U.S. is 700,000, and we're a population of 340 million. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So we can't let it go in that direction. We can't let even if we flatten the curve, we cannot let the pandemic take a natural trajectory. It's too catastrophic. So we have to try to contain it long before it reaches that point. And the only way of doing that is case isolation, which means that when somebody gets infected and gets the COVID-19 infection, they are quarantined so that they don't spread it to others. And that can only happen when there's 100% testing. This was proven to a large extent in South Korea. It's proven in Vietnam, was proven in Germany, that by having essentially 100% availability of testing, we can potentially know all the people who are infected at a given time and get them quarantined. And that's the only way of bringing the pandemic to an end. And anyway, so that's the point I want to make here. Now, the response to the pandemic has been interesting and divergent, and there has been a lot of reports of good. So we have a report on the 19th of March that some of the major pharmaceutical companies said they were going to share resources, they're going to share clinical trial data, they're going to cooperate towards finding treatments and vaccines. On the 23rd of March, a pharmaceutical company known as AbbVie, based in Chicago, announced that it will relinquish its patents all over the world for a drug called Kaletra, which is a combination of two antivirals, lopinavir and ritonavir. And there's early evidence that this combination drug will be useful in treating COVID-19. It was developed for Ebola. On the same day, Gilead Sciences, on the other hand, receives FDA approval for designating its drug, its antiviral drug, remdesivir, for something called orphan status, which gives the company exclusivity on sales and rights to set prices for 7 years, along with tax incentives and other benefits. In early March, so probably in the first week of March, Gilead filed the application. This is a San Francisco-based company. Files the application for orphan status after it was clear that COVID-19 had already become a pandemic. So they knew that if they had a monopoly on this drug, and if the drug worked, they could make a killing. All right, and anyway, so it came under intense criticism, and so 2 days later, bowing to pressure, they asked the FDA to rescind the orphan drug status for remdesivir. There have been unprecedented responses from power structures. So one is the universal provision of healthcare for COVID-19 patients without regard to whether they have insurance coverage. And you talk about the urgency of universal healthcare in those countries and jurisdictions that do not currently have it, including here in this country. So that's a good sign that people see that in a time of crisis, this is a time when we all need universal health care, because if we if some people aren't covered and they aren't treated, then they just go on infecting others. So it means that universal health care is important, not just for those who don't have it right now, but for everybody. Another thing is about paid sick leave. So suddenly we have all these measures to provide paid sick leave because we don't want people who are sick working, and and particularly in critical areas like the food service. We just obviously we don't want people who are infected with COVID-19 working with our food. Housing the unhoused and putting them up in vacant hotel rooms. This is unprecedented. We've talked, like especially in the Bay Area, where homelessness or houselessness is such a widespread problem that because of high housing prices, that it's only now that there are serious efforts to move the unhoused into vacant hotel rooms and other spaces. But the big question is, what will happen when the economy reopens, when those hotel rooms go back to being hotel rooms? What's going to happen to the homeless? Are we going to have a permanent solution? Moratorium on evictions. Well, there shouldn't be evictions in the first place. Talk about moratoriums on rent. So these issues are coming up. So we're starting to see a broader discussion about these problems that are part of the broader housing crisis in the Bay Area. Bailouts for millions of people thrown out of work. Well, shouldn't we have had some kind of a social safety net of this type all along? As food chains are restructured, there's renewed interest in growing more food locally. And that would certainly benefit our food security. It would mean more organically produced foods. But it's just something that we as a society have to address in our long-term future. Thoughts about reducing meat consumption, right? Because the likely origin of the pandemic is the COVID-19 virus jumping from an animal host to a human in a wild animal market where these wild animals are sold for food, and that's how it jumped to human hosts. And then a broader receptiveness to teleconferencing as an alternative to daily commuting and all the congestion and all the pollution that creates. Other discussions are discussions about waiving sanctions. In my previous talk at the Modern Right, Peace and Justice Center, I talked about sanctions led by the United States. And sanctions are, after all, a global weapon through the financial system. And there is there are many circles, not just in the UN, but around the world. But the NGOs are talking about, this is a time when we as humanity need to come together and help each other out of this pandemic, because we're all in this together. And the only way we're going to do it is if we stop fighting each other. Thank you. Sorry about that. So then the newspapers including business newspapers, are talking about it's time to waive sanctions on Venezuela. And also there are other articles about the impact of sanctions on Iran. And Iran is one of the countries that has been badly affected by the pandemic, and so it's good that we're seeing new players that have influence advocating for the lifting of sanctions. And then there's the issue of prisons. And prisons have been identified as a situation of intense crowding, where if one prisoner or even if a prison guard comes down with COVID-19 disease, that it will spread. It will spread like wildfire in the prisons. And so there's been this push around the world to reduce the prison populations so that the density of prisoners is reduced, making it a little bit easier to control or reduce the probability of spread of the disease, and therefore seeking the release of many prisoners who are there for non-violent crimes. And so locally, right here in Santa Clara County, where I am, some 600 non-violent inmates have been released from county jails. Alameda County, another 600. And collectively, the San Francisco Bay Area has released something like 1,500 non-violent criminals already. And so the question in my mind is that we are, here in the United States, the country that incarcerates people at the highest rate in the world. The highest rate in the world. We incarcerate 0.7% of our population. No other country incarcerates people at that rate. And if we can release a good fraction of the non-violent criminals, or people who are alleged to be criminals, why can't we do that all the time? That would reduce our incarceration rate to something that is more normal. And prisons in this country anyway are not institutions for rehabilitation, but rather for punishment. And that needs to be rethought. Okay, so a lot of these things are, it's amazing that what the virus is leading us to talk about and thinking about. And that's why I say that the pandemic is an apocalypse, but it's also an opportunity. Another aspect is the attitude towards essential workers. So there's a belated recognition that the role of essential workers in society and in the economy. And so these are some actual comments. These are not my words, but these are from, for example, the Financial Times. That this pandemic exposes an uncomfortable truth. Those we need the most are often those we value the least. Coronavirus has forced us to rethink how we value and who we value and how. Some of the workers we have left to languish in low-paid and insecure jobs are the very ones we cannot live without. It's not just time to be grateful, it's time to make amends. Now that's a remarkable statement from a business newspaper. It would never have happened in ordinary times. And this is also the theme of our this year's May Day campaign in San Jose, which is going to be online since we can't meet in person. And it is about we are always essential. These essential workers. Let us honor the essential workers who grow our food, harvest our crops, who staff our hospitals and clinics. These are nurses, and who sell food to us daily, such as here in the farmers markets. So that's one message I want to make, is about we are always essential. Let us honor the essential workers, or the frontline workers in our society, and let's accord them the respect, the equality that they deserve. Finally, as Catherine mentioned at the very beginning, the slogan should not be social distancing, but rather physical distancing with social solidarity. And this is a campaign that I have done through my Dance of Peace. And so that brings me to the end of this talk. I'm sorry it went a lot longer than I intended. But as I was developing this talk, I realized there's a lot more that I can talk about, and I hope it hasn't bored you. And with that, I'm going to, let's see, which one?
Okay. All right then. So you'll go ahead. You're ready for some questions now, Sharat?
I will take questions. Yes.
All right then. So you can submit your. You have the ability to unmute yourself. Maybe we can just proceed and see how this goes. If someone has a question, just unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask your question. And if you need help, you can use the chat function. It's at the bottom, the square bubble at the bottom. And you can just let me know on chat and I will unmute you.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I had a question. I am a part of SAS, Safe Ag, Safe Schools. My name's Christy. And we're Greenfield, Salinas, and Watsonville. And we have been advocating on behalf of school children and farm workers. And my question to you is, Nancy Pelosi has proposed a bill that would give farm workers a path to citizenship. And I have talked to people who are in my organization that I participate in. It's not my organization, but in SAS, who were part of the United Farm Workers, and they don't believe this will happen because they believe that there is not the consciousness in our society yet to embrace this. Yet the fact that it's really blatant now that, you know, farm workers are essential, but they're secondary when it comes to services. But Governor Newsom has just passed a bill that would take care of workers, and that just happened yesterday. But Nancy Pelosi's bill, do you think that we can use this as an opportunity to get that passed?
Yes, thank you for the question. I certainly think that the current situation is an opportunity to raise the issues about, you know, farm workers and how essential they are. The problem with farm workers is that they are for the most part out of sight. You know, we as consumers, as certainly as city dwellers, you know, we see grocery workers. We see janitors, but we don't see farm workers. And but the pandemic is certainly an opportunity to raise awareness about farm workers and why their status in this country absolutely needs to be normalized. I mean, we need to have a stable workforce on our farms. Otherwise, who's going to harvest? Who's going to produce our food if our farm workers don't have security? I certainly think it's an opportunity to raise awareness.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sharat, this is Catherine. I have a question. This pandemic is presenting a challenge for moral and political civility. How far will that take us to emerging from this a better society, a more peaceful society?
It's a big question. I mean, this is a situation where we can't make any predictions, but all I can say is that the opportunity is there. The opportunity is there, and the sequence of events with Gilead Sciences it's a good example. It's a good example where a company went into a situation with a bad intention, a very selfish intention, and then was within 2 days forced to reverse itself. And so I think we're coming out of this with a bit better, a bit more aware. But a lot of people are not following that. I mean, this kind of news doesn't really get to the mainstream. It's probably not on television, and so how do we increase awareness of it? I mean, it's there in some measure, and certainly those of us who have gone through it and we see how it's playing out. We're learning from it, and we hope that others can see that. And anyway, from my standpoint, I will continue to be speaking about it, publicizing it, and talking about the moral and ethical lessons of the pandemic.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, let Craig go first. I do have a question. In this particular pandemic, the world, different countries, they have handled it differently. In our country, to me, we didn't do the right job. Going forward, would that have any impact in our November election? Because I certainly would like us to have better leaders, not a leader who say one thing one day and another thing another day and wouldn't even listen to his own advisors. What's your take on this?
Well, my take on it is that we live in the United States right now in times that are extremely polarized, and whatever comes down from the White House is seen in two completely different ways by those who support him and those who oppose him. And so for us, we see that, okay, it's, first of all, what's coming out of the White House is irrational, it's inconsistent, there are these wild swings in what the president says. He doesn't, as you say, he does not listen to his own advisors. He contradicts Anthony Fauci right and left. And on the other hand, his base is responding positively when he says, let's open up the economy. I mean, the talk about reopening the economy in sort of a reckless way is irresponsible. But there are people in his base who are really, really angry at the governors of states who have put those states into lockdowns. And they're in denial. I mean, this is the risk going forward, is that those states are going to open up. I mean, where the governors allow it, and then countries like Brazil where the leadership is in denial, and you know, there are places where COVID-19 is going to explode again, and we're going to be back not just to square one, we could be back to square zero. So unfortunately, the irrationality of the leadership is playing both ways. It plays into the polarization, the political polarization in this country. I wish I had something better to say.
Thank you.
I have a question. It seems like there are three dimensions to the kind of global problem. One is the pandemic. The second one is the economic impacts. The third are the political issues that each country plays out. Do you have any comment on how the priority, how to approach the priority questions about the pandemic and the economic impacts?
Well, so what I said, I mean, the ultimate exit, of course, is from the pandemic is when we have a vaccine and there's enough global production of the vaccine for everybody. Before that, the only possible exit is going to be through, as I said, 100% testing, and then we can contain all the known cases of COVID-19. So let me can you tell me a little more what your question is?
I think the concern about opening up the economy is obviously the economic impacts of closed businesses and distancing and so on has affected all sorts of you know, normal patterns. And the normal patterns create a stable economy. The pandemic has interfered with that, obviously. And so the question is, putting in some perspective, the priority of the pandemic versus the economics, because it seems to me both are serious questions. And you know, it's one thing that we can debate, we can argue about the science. I don't want to say argue. We can support the science about the pandemic and the vaccines and the testing and the globalness of trying to get a handle on the facts. But the economics still comes home. And that is a continuing concern in every household and in every community. And so I have my own dilemma about, I think the pandemic is serious enough to be addressed completely. And I put the economic issue as, well, something that can emerge and evolve after that. But I'm looking for your perspective on the economics versus the pandemic.
Yeah, so so what is going to have to happen is, as I said, is if we get to the point where we have enough tests, then we can open up the economy while containing the known cases. And there will still be, you know, precaution depending upon how confident we are that we have contained the known cases, all the known cases. You know, then we can start lifting up on other restrictions, such as the social distancing, the wearing of masks. The social distancing is is easier to do, but like if you want to open up the restaurants to eating in the restaurant, obviously you can't do that with people wearing masks. So that can only happen when we have confidence that we have contained all of the known cases. Now, the ongoing threat is going to be which is going to mean that there is going to be, you know, major restrictions in for example, the travel industry. If some countries like Brazil are in denial, and they are going to become super hotspots. I'm not talking about New York or Spain scale pandemics. I'm talking about millions. If millions of people contract the disease, you know, we cannot open up the airline routes around the world. So there are going to be travel restrictions because some places will be able to contain the disease and have confidence that we've got all the infections under quarantine. In other places, we won't have that confidence. So it's going to be very complicated. It's going to be a very complicated exit from this until we have a vaccine. And there is this trade-off. There is a very genuine trade-off between the public health aspect of this and the economic aspect. The projections so far on the decline in the US economy, the decline in the global economy, have been based on unrealistic assumptions about these economies opening up again within a matter of weeks. We've heard people talk about, oh, the global GDP will decline by 5-10%. And if we're in a lockdown for 3 months, it's going to be a lot more than that. And of course, it's not a question of a lockdown or not a lockdown. It's a question of an exit strategy that is going to open up the economy in very, very specific ways. I mean, that is the general perspective on how we're going to ease out of it. The specifics, you know, and exactly how it plays out are, of course, I've learned to not try to predict anything, but it's going to be complicated. We can do it, and how much it will alleviate the economy, of course, remains to be seen.
Sharat, this is Craig Wanke. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I just can't tell you how much I enjoy your talks, all the way from what you say to how you say it to your marvelous, clear PowerPoints. Just a sensational thing, and I just can't tell you. I mean, I could sit here for 3 more hours personally and listen to you. But thank you again so much, and I hope that you certainly come back in the future and continue sharing your wiseness. Thank you, Sharat.
Well, thank you so much for the compliments. I must say that after I do the research, I mean, even though the topics are sometimes depressing, but it's something that, you know, something that I can do. I may not be able to do some other jobs, but this is one that I can do, and if it's helpful, I will continue doing it, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sharat, I have one more question. you might know the answer to. You have statistics on the fact that in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, they have released people from prison. Do you happen to know if Monterey County has released any? And also, do you have any data on the situation with the detention center, 34,000 people spread in different states? I know that the Amnesty International has been trying to push the issue and asking the governors of, say, California and New Jersey or New York to reduce the number detained, because 92% of those detained, they actually have sponsors that are waiting for them if they get released.
Yes, so I mean, I did not look into the numbers in Monterey County, and it's reassuring. I didn't know that the 92% had sponsors. That's reassuring too, because that makes it a lot easier for prison authorities to.
I wasn't talking about prisoners, immigrants.
Immigrants, oh, I see.
Immigration status and refugee status.
Oh, okay.
Detention centers, they are not called jails.
Yes, right. So, so what is the question about the immigrant detention centers?
Yeah, do you have any data on that? Whether the governor, because they have the Amnesty International have requested some of the governors to act on that, because the detention center, they are spread into many states. And they asked California, and I haven't followed that. I don't know.
So the situation in California is that our current government has taken measures to shut down private prisons that are that have contracts with the immigration enforcement, ICE and border patrol. So you know, the state of California has done what it can. In terms of the numbers who are under such immigration detention, they're still well into the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And it's the prospect of shutting that down is poor under the current administration in Washington. I'm not sure what
Thank you.
Is there something else that you'd like me to try to address?
Not at this point. Thank you. You have done a wonderful job. Like Craig has said, it's a wonderful presentation. I have gained a lot. And you put out the statistics I didn't know. I didn't know that 0.7% of the population is in prison in the United States. I know that the United States is the biggest jailer in the world. That I do know.
Yes.
But many different things will happen. Hopefully, we emerge out of this as a kinder society.
Yes.
Why?
Yes. I want to also thank you, Sharat, for all the very good information. And I would just say also, in addition to waiving sanctions that's been called for, that also the UN Secretary General calling for global ceasefire is another good outcome. And of course, it hasn't happened, a global ceasefire, but at least Yemen now is having a ceasefire. So that's another positive thing that's coming or being looked at more seriously.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that certainly is true. Of course the Yemen one is, it's not that before the pandemic there wasn't discussion of a ceasefire. There were several ceasefires that were later broken in a very short time. But it does give, I think the pandemic, the background of the pandemic, you know, gives the warring parties an additional reason to cease fire, and that's a good thing.
There's a call
Also,
from Bell. Oh, sorry, Lynn.
sorry. I just wanted to add, this is Christy here, that there's a number of lawmakers that are demanding the halt to the wall work because of the virus, and quite a few, it's Arizona and Texas, and there's Mississippi. There's several lawmakers that are asking that we halt that as a priority right now, that wall that isn't going to do any good at all. And it's just really taking our money. But that's a good sign, at least temporarily. I don't anticipate that that's going to be a ongoing thing after this is over, except there is hope in the fact that he might not, and God willing, he won't be reelected, but that is something that people are addressing. I think the more that we dialogue about every aspect of our life, with lawmakers and with where our priorities are with each other, I think it's going to help in a positive way.
Yes, well, thank you for that. Yeah.
Hi, Sharat. I wanted to thank you very much for highlighting something that's usually not so emphasized by people, that the distancing is not social but physical that we need. We need to be physically separated, but we need socially to be together, that we're all in this together, and that we need social solidarity. So if you allow me, I will use your phrase, the physical distance and social solidarity. I think it's important to emphasize that. As you said, we need to stop fighting. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for that. It's not my phrase. I'm just one of the many people who are trying to popularize that phrase and to you know, debunk the social distancing slogan that's been going around.
Yes.
But thank you for that. Let's do that all together and try to you know, shift the discussion to social solidarity and physical distancing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharat. Thank you for joining us and presenting today. Do you have any parting words for us? I think everything you said is valuable.
Can I have one comment?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Dr. Lynn, I just want to share, I just want to join Craig Wanke's and Sylvia's compliment of you and your research and your sharing it and your presentation and how precise it was. I was particularly impressed with two points that you made very specifically, is the Saudi-Russia competition on the oil production. And you put the United States right in the middle of that. And I hadn't been hearing that from the normal media, and I can completely understand it. So I appreciate your sharing that perspective, that research. The other thing is your warning, I consider it a warning, about migrant workers throughout the world, China, Europe, India, and the United States. There's an emerging problem with the migrant worker, the treatment of migrant workers, and our own system of whatever our society is based on, capitalism or consumerism or buying forever, the migrant worker structure supports the underpinning of that whole system. And I appreciate so much your calling attention to that. So I just want to add my compliments as well to your research and your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate, all of your interest, and it's so wonderful to have this kind of interested audience in Monterey County. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, Sharat. So we'll go ahead and end the meeting, and hope we'll have more like this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So now we
Take care.
know how to do it. So
Now that we know how. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next time.